Coming to see me. I'm not sure what he wants to see me about, but I guess he wants to make a deal. Everybody does. They all want to make a deal because we have something that they all want.
The Canadian Prime Minister tomorrow.
Here at the Chris Highland Show. Really appreciate everybody rolling up. Got a fantastic show for you today. We got to be talking about Donald Trump meeting with Carney in the White House, and that meeting because Donald Trump had some very hard lines, some interesting takeaways from this little tete-a-tete with the incoming Canadian Prime Minister, especially considering that the western half of his country is talking about secession and potentially joining the United States. So very interesting stuff there. We've also got some bombshell information on the entire COVID nonsense that we're going to get into as Trump signs an executive order essentially banning what caused COVID in the first place, which was gain-of-function research. That and the fact that it was an establishment globalist conspiracy to destroy Trump in the United States. And then finally, we're going to get into our thumbnail for today, and that is Byron Donalds appearing on Meet the Depressed with Kristen Welker. I guess she's a glutton for punishment. It wasn't enough to get destroyed by Trump. She wanted to get destroyed by Donalds too. So we're going to check all that out. Thanks so much for rolling up. Little Joe in the house. Thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate everybody. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And most importantly, share the Chris Highland Show with everybody that you know. All right, let's dive right into Donald Trump and Carney in the White House as Carney came to pay homage to Trump? We'll see, because it was an interesting meeting from a lot of different ways. But remember, if everybody remembers Mark Carney's, thumping comments, he was all up in everybody's grill that he was going to be tough with Trump, and that, Trump, he's not going to take any guff from Trump, and this, that, and the other thing. Well, let's just get to one of the opening scenes from the meeting with Trump in the White House. Here we go.
Thank you for your hospitality and above all for your leadership. You're a transformational president, focus on the economy with a relentless focus on the American worker, securing your borders, ending the scourge of fentanyl and other opioids, and securing the world. And I've been elected with my colleagues here, with the help of my colleagues here. I'm going to spread the credit to transform Canada with a similar focus on the economy, securing our borders, again on fentanyl, much greater focus on defense and security, securing the Arctic and developing the Arctic. And the history of Canada and the U.S. is we're stronger when we work together, and there's many opportunities to work together. And I look forward to, addressing some of those issues that we have, but also finding those areas of mutual cooperation so we can move forward.
That's good. Very nice. Thank you very much. Very nice.
What happened to all the tough talk about Trump from Canada? What happened to he was going to school Trump? He's not going to take any guff from Trump. He's not going to do this. He's not going to do that. What happened to all the tough talk? Oh, you're a transformational leader. Oh, you're absolutely securing the world. You're securing the world. Well, of course he is. He's the only one out there doing it. Now, Carney has been talking a big game for a long time, but as soon as he gets in front of Trump, he basically bends the knee. Yep, you're a transformational leader. You're doing everything. You're amazing. Now, there was a couple of interesting places. Now, most of these were Trump essentially putting the foot down on Canada. So check the next one out, because this is absolutely amazing. Capo in the house. Boom. Thanks so much for being here. Little Joe, Carney melted. You are absolutely correct. He did. like a wax candle. So at one point, the media was asking Trump, and they tried to get Trump, they tried to stick Trump on this whole tariff situation. They were trying to shill for Canada, and Trump was having none of this. Check this out. This was my favorite answer of the day. Here we go.
Is there anything the Prime Minister can say to you today to change your mind on tariff in Canada?
Tariffing cars?
Tariffing Canada. Is there anything he can say to you in the course of your meeting with him today that can get you to lift tariffs on Canada?
No.
Why not?
Just the way it is.
I love it. No. Is there anything you can do? Is there anything that he could say to get you to lift the tariffs on Canada? No. Well, why not? Because that's the way it is. That's the way it is for everybody. If you want to lift the tariffs, make a deal. We've got to have a bilateral trade agreement with teeth that essentially opens your markets to American products. Remember, Canada is tariffing the crap out of American products. American cars, American dairy, American, what was it? Bacon or Canadian or syrup or something. I don't know. I mean, I know the dairy was like 240% tariffs. Canada is tariffing the crap out of American products. They do not open their market to us. Regardless of what, we're the biggest consumer of American stuff. You might be with huge tariffs. So no, we are not going to lift any tariffs on any country without a bilateral trade agreement, without equality and fairness of trade. And especially in this case, Trump is far more upset about the fact that we have a $200 billion deficit with Canada at the same time that we are their military. They're not spending bupkis on military, even as part of NATO. They exist at the good graces of the United States. That is why they are protected. That is why people fear to go into Canada, because they know that the US is not going to stand for anybody messing with Canada because it's on our border. Even if we didn't like the Canadians, we would not stand for anybody putting a foothold on Canada, which is why Canada has been in trouble, because we've got reports now of Chinese soldiers doing winter training in Canada, of all the Chinese products flowing in Canada, the fentanyl production that's going on in Canada that's then being shipped to Mexico to come across the southern border. There's all sorts of issues that Trump is unhappy about. And so this bilateral trade agreement will need to address them before we get to anywhere near lowering the tariffs. Now, as Trump said in his statement, before we get into kind of the longer clip that I want to show you, this was Trump's Truth Social before the meeting. I look forward to meeting the new Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney. I very much want to work with him, but cannot understand one simple truth. Why is America subsidizing Canada by $200 billion? In addition to giving them free military protection. As I said, this is one of Trump's biggest issues, and many, many other things. We don't need their cars. We don't need their lumber. We don't need anything they have other than their friendship, which hopefully we will always maintain. They, on the other hand, need everything from us. The Prime Minister will be arriving shortly, and that will be most likely my only question of consequence. Here's Trump basically lowering the gauntlet before Carney even arrives. Now, obviously, this is full of very hyperbolic, language. We don't need anything from them. They need everything from us. Okay, that's Trump's way of talking. That's his negotiating ploy. But to be honest, there is very little that we need from them, other than some rare earth materials. We like oil and gas from Canada as opposed to oil and gas from other places. And Canada is a huge producer of it in Alberta. And so with that, we are, there are some things that we may want from Canada. But now I want you to get into this clip with President Trump talking specifically about some of these things with Carney, the Prime Minister. Here we go.
Well, respectfully, Canadians' view on this is not going to change on the 51st state. Secondly, we are the largest client of the United States in the totality of all the goods. So we are the largest client of the United States. We have a tremendous auto sector between the two of us, and the changes that made have been helpful. 50% of a car that comes from Canada is American. That's not like anything else in the world. And to your question about is there one thing? No, this is a bigger discussion. There are much bigger forces involved, and this will take some time and some discussions, and that's why we're here, to have those discussions, and that is represented by who's sitting around the table.
See, the conflict is, and this is very friendly.
So I love it. Right? So he tries to respond to the 51st state thing because Trump brought it up in the meeting. Trump actually said, hey, why don't you just become the 51st state? That's never going to happen. Never, never, never. And then Trump under his breath like, never say never. But But what we could get to, if Canada's willing to play ball, if they're willing to stop the nonsense, we might be able to get to some things like a common currency, like complete and open free trade. Some of those things are possible, but not while there's all this blustering. But let's get back to Trump.
Friendly. We're not, this is not going to be like another little blow at someone else. It was much different. This is a very friendly
AKA Zelensky.
conversation, but we want to make our own cars. We don't really want cars from Canada. And we put tariffs on cars from Canada, and at a certain point, it won't make economic sense for Canada to build those cars. And we don't want steel from Canada because we're making our own steel, and we're having massive steel plants being built right now as we speak. We don't want Canadian steel, and we don't want Canadian aluminum and various other things because we want to be able to do it ourselves. And we, because of, past thinking of people, we have a tremendous deficit with Canada. In other words, they have a surplus with us. And there's no reason for us to be subsidizing Canada. Canada's a place that will have to be able to take care of itself economically. I assume they can. I will tell you that Trudeau, when I spoke to him, I used to call him Governor Trudeau. I think that probably didn't help his election. But when I spoke to him, I said, so why are we taking your cars? Why are we taking we want to make them ourselves. I mean, I said, and if the price of your cars went up, or if we put a tariff on your cars of 25%, what would that mean to you? He said, that would mean the end of Canada. He actually said that to me. And I said, that's a strange answer, but I understand the answer. But no, I mean, it's hard to justify subsidizing Canada to the tune of maybe $200 billion a year. We protect Canada militarily, and we always will. We're going to, that's not a money thing. But we always will. But, it's not fair. But why are we subsidizing Canada $200 billion a year, or whatever the number might be? It's a very substantial number. And it's hard for the American taxpayer to say, gee whiz, we love doing that. Thank you very much. We're going to have a very substantive vote. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Of course, the media goes apoplectic because Trump is talking truth, and he's very blunt in his manner. We don't need Canadian cars. We don't want Canadian cars. We don't want Canadian steel. Now then he backs it up with the reason. It's not that we don't like Canada. It's not like their cars stink or their steel sucks. No, it's the fact that we want to and frankly need to do it ourselves. Now, can there be free and flowing and open trade with Canada? Absolutely. All of their tariffs have to come down. All of their economic barriers have to come down to our products. And we can begin to get to a point where potentially we could erase all trade barriers with Canada, have a common currency, and do all sorts of things. It could be a phenomenal partnership where we essentially encapsulate all of Canada, all of their rare earth material, minerals, all of their raw resources, which they are the second largest value of raw resources on the planet. Number one being Russia, number two being Canada, number three being the United States. That could be a tremendous, tremendous partnership with a common currency and absolutely no trade barriers. It's going to take a while to get there. But Trump is on this bandwagon of that's the type of relationship he wants to have, hence the 51st state. Frankly, we don't want Canada as a 51st state. We don't, because they'd be so liberal, they'd skew all the politics. But that's neither here nor there. But an open trade relationship which utilizes the best of both, that could be a huge game changer. Because as Trump said, we're always going to protect them. We're never not going to militarily protect them. It's in our own best interest. No one's ever going to get a foothold on Canada. So that meeting with Trump and Canada today was, it was not the fireworks of the Zelensky meeting. There was some undertoned fireworks, but Trump is making it very clear to Canada that you need to come and play ball. And this is just the beginning of some very long, drawn out discussions and negotiations. We can get to a great place or it can be ugly. But as Trump said very emphatically during that meeting, we do not need you. You need us. We do not need Canada. We want a relationship with Canada. We want a friendship. I would love for them to work out the details and get to a common currency, completely open trade arrangement. That would be fantastic, especially if Canada towed the line and got rid of all of their Chinese influence, all the fentanyl, all of the illegal immigration nonsense that's coming into their country so it can't come into ours. But that would be a tremendous relationship that would make both countries much richer. And then we could work together on bringing Greenland into the fold, and we would own the Arctic. We would absolutely trump, pardon the pun, Russia in that respect. We would blockade them from ever controlling it. So that would be of great, great strategic value if they can pick. But as Trump said, we don't need them. They need us. So Donald Trump, in his classic negotiating form, the art of the deal, setting things up to potentially improve things with Canada. Now, with that, I want to switch to a different vein. Thanks, everybody, for rolling up. Marlene in the house. I am all for it. Me too. I absolutely agree. Thanks so much for being here. We got a bunch of people watching. If everybody could please smash that like button for me. Like, comment, and subscribe. Please, lots of comments. Let us know how we're doing. And most importantly, share the Chris Highland Show with everybody that you know. Really appreciate you all being here. Now, with that, I want to dive into a much darker story, but one that has a good beginning. And that good beginning is Donald Trump signed an executive order today that I think is of huge importance. This was an executive order that essentially redoes some things from back in before the Obama administration. Things that were essentially put in place because they were undone. They were done. It's a long storied history of gain of function research. Donald Trump signed an executive order today banning gain of function research, putting severe penalties in place for trying to outsource it to other nations. All the things that Fauci did, all the things that the global establishment, administrative state did to try to outsource this to escape American scrutiny. This stuff was outlawed a long time ago, but it was brought back in by that disgusting bill that was passed during the Bush, a Rhino Republican administration, the Patriot Act, which is the bane of our existence, the bane against the Constitution, the bane against American freedom. The Patriot Act, which brought it back into style. Obama had basically outlawed it, had put some constraints on it that obviously Biden and everybody else just ignored. And then it became huge. They used, the global administrative state used that to drive COVID, to basically attack the Trump presidency, destroy the economy before the election. Well, Trump outlawed it today, and we've got a whole series of events that are taking place around this. It's brought this whole situation, this whole story back into the limelight. So let's start with Trump signing the executive order. Pardon me, just give me one sec here.
Bobby, do you have anything to say? We signed some very important documents having to do with health. Do you have anything to say?
Mr. President, gain of function is an historic day, the end of gain of function research funding by the federal government and also controls by private corporations on gain of function studies. This was the kind of study that was engaged in by the United States military and intelligence agencies beginning in 1947. By 1969, the CIA said that they had reached nuclear equivalency, that they could kill the entire U.S. population for 29 cents per person. That year, President Nixon went to Fort Detrick and announced a unilateral end to this kind of research, what they called dual-use research, research that was for vaccination and also for military purposes. He then persuaded over 180 countries to sign the Bioweapons Charter in 1973. That basically ended gain of function research on the globe until 2002. Until 2001, after the anthrax attacks, we passed the Patriot Act, and the Patriot Act had a provision, a little-known provision in it, that said that although the Bioweapons Charter is still in effect, and the Geneva Convention is still in effect, U.S. federal officials who violate it cannot be prosecuted. And that relaunched weapons arms race, and that was driven by gain-of-function research. In 20...
So as we talked about, gain-of-function research was essentially dead and buried until that disgusting bill, the Patriot Act, that abomination that never should have been passed, but here we are, brought it back, allowed some loopholes that brought it right back into the public square. And here we are.
2014, 3 of those bugs escaped from U.S. labs, and President Obama declared a moratorium on future use. And instead, a lot of that research was moved offshore to the Wuhan lab. And it launched bioweapons arms race all around the country, all around the world, so that China's engaged in it, developing all kinds of weapons using AI and CRISPR technologies that are really devastating. Russia is deeply engaged in it, Iran and many other countries. It's a kind of weapon that always has blowback. There's always bad news. And justification for this kind of weaponry and these kind of research was always that we have to do this to develop vaccines to counter a future pandemic. And all of the...
Which is completely ridiculous when you think about it. Because, okay, so we're going to do gain-of-function research to develop vaccines so that we can counter these bioweapons in the future. Well, unless you happen to know what bioweapons they're working on, your vaccine is useless. All they have to do is tweak their formula, tweak their bioweapon just a little bit, and your vaccine doesn't work. So the idea that we're going to do this to develop vaccines, unless you're developing 1,000,001 vaccines, so that you have almost every possibility covered, which you can never do. It's a ridiculous panning statement. Then the idea is utter nonsense. You're going to have to do something where you can begin to fast track vaccinations, and not the kind that they did during COVID, this mRNA nonsense, which clearly has not been effective. But anyway, so we've got this going on. Well, this has brought this entire story back into the forefront. And there were 2 things that happened recently that I want to get to. Benny Johnson revealed on his show something that happened to him at the beginning of the COVID nonsense 4 years ago, or 4 or 5 years ago, back when COVID first started in 2019 and 2020. I want to play that clip. And then I want to get into, we've got a whistleblower that essentially has revealed that the US government knew. They knew that the clinical trials that Pfizer was putting forth were faked. They were nonsense. They were garbage. They were fraudulent. So we want to get into that clip as well, because this goes back to the entire Biden administration when they mandated this vaccine, when they gave when Fauci and everybody else gave everybody this emergency use authorization. They knew what they were doing was putting a harmful experimental chemical in people's bodies, and that never should have happened. This is Dr. Mengele stuff. All right, let's dive into this clip from Benny Johnson, which I thought was extremely eye-opening. For those of you who don't like Pompeo and don't like Pence, this is going to be right up your alley.
Here it is. How deep was the attack against President Trump? I don't think I have any pictures of it. I'd have to check. But I was invited to Mike Pompeo's office. And right at the beginning of COVID, I got invitations to meet with Mike Pence and Mike Pompeo. Now, you're an influencer, you're somebody with a podcast, you have social media presence. This is not totally, this is kind of like normal, right? It's not completely out of the blue, but I'd never met with these guys before, right?
So at the beginning of the pandemic, he gets invited to meet Pompeo and Pence. This is going to get interesting. Hey, welcome in, Lynn Sanger. Thanks so much for joining us. Nellie, also in the house. Thanks for rolling up. Let's keep going.
They weren't my friends. Mike Pence wasn't my friend. Mike Pompeo, I didn't know Mike Pompeo. He was Secretary of State at the time. But for some reason, right when COVID launched, they decided to haul in big-time Trump people to go meet with these 2 guys. And what did both of them tell me? Both of them told me in these secret meetings, these little private meetings, that what's going to happen is we're going to have to shut down the economy. Mike Pence and Mike Pompeo both told me that. Why? I'm just telling you what happened. And that shocked me. I remember going home to my wife and saying,
Think about that. So it's two people you've never met. You've never interviewed them other than at outside events. You've never been called into their office. Call you in as an influencer and say, we're going to have to shut down the economy. What? What are you talking about? We're talking about, at the time, COVID was a nothing burger. Remember, and this is what I always remembered about the coronavirus issue when it first started. If any of you remember, there was a cruise ship basically populated with retirees that they discovered, somebody tested positive and they stuck that cruise ship miles out from shore and let nobody on or off for about 2 weeks. That cruise ship was out there and the COVID virus just festered. It went through everybody, including retirees. Most of the people on that cruise ship were 60 or older, a high risk group. There were at least 2 people on that cruise ship that were on, at the time, anti-rejection medication for transplants. And if you remember, this is what always struck me when all of the death counts started rolling and the idea of the pandemic, and this was so horrible and we have to shut everything down. I kept going back to that cruise ship going, wait a minute. When this wasn't a thing and that cruise ship, everybody got COVID, nobody died. Nobody's on a respirator. There was very little adverse effects at all. People got the flu. It lasted for a couple of weeks and then they got off. There were no reports of serious medical problems or deaths from that cruise ship. And yet somehow this morphed into the greatest threat to mankind in modern history. And I kept going back to that cruise ship. And I kept thinking to myself, this is a scam. This is not real. Something is going on here. Here we go.
the most insane thing just happened. You're never going to believe it. But Mike Pompeo just told me that we're going to have to shut down the economy because of COVID? What the hell is this? And lo and behold, ladies and gentlemen, here we are, sitting on the outset of 4 years from the total and complete shutdown of the economy, destruction of President Trump's first term, and you got to ask yourself, was Mike Pence and Mike Pompeo colluding with the deep state to destroy their boss? Was this treason?
Yes. That's what I'm just going to call a spade. Yes. Especially considering their actions and their words after the fact. This is the same Mike Pence who turned completely turncoat against Trump, suddenly started attacking him over the nonsense J6 crap, who in an interview with Tucker Carlson, when talking about, what was happening to American cities versus what we needed to do for Ukraine, basically said, Americans, they're not my concern. We need to give money to Ukraine. I remember that over Americans, they're not my concern. That's not my problem. They're not my problem. Americans aren't my problem. America's not my problem. We need to give money to Ukraine. He was a deep state stooge. Probably not allowed to use that word. He was an administrative state stooge. It's exactly what he was. I think he was a traitor. That's my personal opinion.
Something that we look forward to asking General Flynn. He'll be on the program soon. But was this treason? Did they get to them? And now you've seen, obviously, the motions of Pompeo, the movements of Pompeo and Pence afterwards, after this. And you got to say, yeah, totally, completely.
Yeah, totally, completely. And there was more than just them in on the scam. This was the other story I uncovered around this same topic that I think you need to see. Here's a woman who was employed essentially by a subcontractor to Pfizer, who was in charge of their clinical trials for the coronavirus vaccine. Check this out.
I am absolutely shocked at the outcome that we just heard about, and I want to talk about that with you. But for anyone who isn't familiar with your story and this case, can you give them a brief overview, please?
Sure. This is, I feel like it's been a long time since we last spoke, but this case is going on 5 years now. I was a regional director overseeing clinical trial sites in Pfizer's COVID-19 clinical trial for their vaccine. When I was working on the trial, I reported not only to my company, but eventually to the FDA, irregularities, violations of protocol, things that could potentially affect the integrity of the overall safety and efficacy data of their trial. So that's kind of what started this for me. I contacted the FDA at the end of September of 2020, and about 6 hours later, I was fired for what was their reason, Maria? I was not a good fit. I was not a good fit for reporting fraudulent conduct in a clinical trial. So go figure.
Can you just refresh everyone as to what you observed?
The list is so long. You know, the first thing that I always try to remind people is what is so basic to me and important for patients is informed consent. If you're participating in a clinical trial, you want to be fully aware of what the study involves, what your risks are, what your responsibilities are as a patient. So that was key for me, finding that we were not providing patients with full and informed consent was my number one concern and something I addressed immediately. I would say, you know, top three, the second was not reporting adverse events, including those that were serious. We have an obligation to the patients to protect them. We need to follow those adverse events through their resolution. And my company was refusing to do that. We were so inundated with the number of adverse events that patients were reporting that we could not keep up with them. And we were actually, I took a call directly from Pfizer asking what our plan was as a company to hire more people to take these calls and emails, et cetera, to report back to the FDA these adverse events that were occurring on such a large scale. So that was another thing that I saw. And I was only employed with this company for 18 days. I do you know, they like to throw that in my face like it's, you know.
This is amazing. The fact that Pfizer knew that this was a coordinated effort to essentially hide the truth. But it gets even bigger than that. And that is the fact that the government knew what was going on. The US government admitted something shocking. They knew Pfizer's COVID trials were a complete sham back in 2020. The Biden administration knew they were a scam. The government knew they were a scam. Everybody knew, everybody was in on the grift. The grift was destroy the Trump presidency, destroy the Trump economy, transfer trillions of dollars from Main Street to Wall Street and to the 1%, to the elites, to the establishment. It was also introduce control measures, part of which would destroy people's health over the long term. The whole thing was a scam. The whole thing was an op. And this is just absolutely disgusting. But this is what we're dealing with. This is what Trump, the level of the administrative state, the level of the treason that goes, that is the rot, the metastasizing cancer that is the federal government, that has to be cut out, that has to be rooted out, that has to be destroyed, that has to be irradiated. We have to go through a form of governmental chemo that is going to be extremely painful. People need to get ready for the fact that it's got to get worse before it gets better in a lot of cases. We have to get this rot out. And right now you've got judges and you've got other people that are opposing Trump in doing this. We need to make sure these people get out of the way so that we can get rid of what has become a non-US, an anti-American, anti-Main Street, anti-American worker, anti-US globalist cabal inside of our own government. And we can see it clearly in what happened with coronavirus. We can see it clearly in what happens with the blob, the CIA, the DOD, and the State Department as they go around the world, starting wars, festering fomenting internal conflict within countries, things like that. It's got to end. Now, we'll end that, but we'll be following up with this as we find out more. Obviously, we've been waiting for James O'Keefe, who's going to be releasing something tomorrow. He's been teasing it with Epstein. He's been teasing it with Pfizer. Who knows? Maybe it's all linked together. I don't know. I'll be waiting with bated breath to see what O'Keefe reveals tomorrow. As you know, he went into hiding 7 days ago, basically said, I'm going to go off the grid. I'm going dark. I'm afraid for my life, and we'll be releasing in 7 days. Now, part of that's a marketing ploy because he wants people talking about it. Got it. It worked. But I want to see what he has to say. In the meantime, let's get to our thumbnail for today, and that is Byron Donalds, who I absolutely love Byron Donalds. He's definitely a +1. We don't like politicians in general. They are tools. We don't fall in love with any of them personally. They are tools, and Byron Donalds is absolutely a +1 on almost every single case. Byron Donalds was on Meet the Depressed with Kristen Welker. So here we go. I want to dive into this. We're going to have a little teaser, and then we're going to dive into most of the interview. We'll be stopping it as we go along. But let's check out as Byron Donalds was on Meet the Depressed with the depressed, the absolute hapless Kristen Welker. Here we go. While we do that, please like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share the Chris Highland Show with everybody that you know. Really appreciate everybody rolling up. Please smash that like button. Here we go.
Talking about the numbers, you're saying there are so many people here that it would just take too long. But let me ask you, the Constitution says that everyone who's here is entitled to due process.
Right now, what we know is that when people came into the country illegally, almost 90% of them would not even go to the hearings. So
again, okay, we're gonna dive into this whole interview now. That was basically their lead-in. Because Kristen Welker tried the entire time to basically pin Byron Donalds and essentially the administration on, you've got to get everybody due process, due process, due process, due process. She doesn't even know what the words mean or how they are applied. Due process is different for everybody. Your due process for a speeding ticket is far different than your due process for a capital murder case. Think about it. The amount of due process that you are due and that you are willing to even engage in. Can you request a trial? Sure. You don't get a trial by jury for a speeding ticket. It's a civil offense. It's not even a misdemeanor. The courts are not going to pay for that. You get it adjudicated by a judge, in and out. That's it. You'll be there for 5 minutes. Your level now, but if you are charged with a capital case or you are charged with a serious felony, then you are going to get all the due process. But that's where we get into the rub. So let's dive into Byron Donalds. He discusses a lot of these issues with the hapless Meet the Depressed host, Welker. All right, here we go.
Talk about the president's comments there as well as the economy, but let's talk about that moment when he said, I don't know, when I asked him if he has to uphold the Constitution of as the president of the United States. What was your reaction to hearing that? Do you think he has to uphold every part of the Constitution, including the Fifth Amendment?
Well, first of all, let's be clear. I think what the president was talking about is, yes, he's going to uphold the Constitution. He's taking advice from his legal team, led obviously by the White House counsel, the Attorney General of the United States, everybody working at the Department of Homeland Security, about all of the parameters that they are using to deport illegal aliens out of this country, which is the core of President Trump's victory last November. Let's remember, the American people have been clear that they want criminal illegal aliens, number one, and then illegal aliens overall returned to their home country. Donald Trump is fulfilling that promise. I think to the broader question in this entire situation, is it okay for the previous administration to abuse the border security laws, abuse asylum, abuse temporary protected status, open up the country to millions of people, and then hide behind due process where it would take us 15 years to actually process people back out of the United States?
And you're talking about the numbers. You're saying there are so many people here that it would just take too long. But let me ask you, the Constitution says that everyone who's here is entitled to due process. So I understand there are big numbers that you are talking about and that the president is dealing with. But if you're going to follow the Constitution, don't you have to follow it, what it says by letter and law?
Yes, you're entitled to due process, but your level, your type of due process as a non-citizen not charged with a capital or serious felony are two different things. This is just absolutely ridiculous. She absolutely owns herself later on. Let's keep going. This is just nonsense. She infuriates me. These people infuriate me. They want these illegal criminal aliens in the country. They are absolute shills for them. This is their new army. This is their new protected class. This is their new, everybody who's an illegal will be their hero, their martyr.
Look at this. When you come in, let's say on an asylum package, that is at the discretion of the administration.
Exactly.
The administration is now saying, you know what? We are going to have a legal detainer for you to be deported, and you are going to be removed from the United States. That's under the premise of how you came in. Second thing, every illegal alien that came here, the first thing they did is they broke the law coming into our country. They broke the law. Let's level set here. That's what they did. So there is an orderly process that the president and his team is going through. They're not just rounding up people and dropping them out of the country. That is not true. Everybody that's been deported to this point has had a legal deportation order executed by the president's administration.
But in this case, in the case of...
Which means they have already received due process, Kristen Welker, you complete moron.
Kilmer Abrego Garcia, the administration said it was an administrative error. And in 2019, an immigration judge issued an order that's still in effect that he should not be deported back to El Salvador. And I guess this goes back to the question that I was asking to President Trump. Do you think that everyone, citizens and non-citizens, are entitled to due process?
Well, first and foremost, let me be clear with you. When it comes to due process, that is a privilege reserved for American citizens. When people are in our country illegally, there is a semblance of due process, but not nearly at the level of a United States citizen, of an American. There are two different standards. You come to America, you are a guest in the United States. That privilege can be revoked. And a lot of these illegal aliens were not guests. They showed up at the border. Joe Biden abused our laws, ignored our laws, and let them in. And yet, what are the American people supposed to say about that?
Exactly. They are guests. Illegals aren't even guests, but people who have been allowed into the country through a border checkpoint are guests in our country. And that guest status can be revoked at will by the president of the United States. No due process needed. Absolutely none. They are not citizens. They are not charged with a capital crime.
The Constitution, let me just read you. This is the Fifth Amendment. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces. And then it goes on to say, nor shall any person be subjected for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life, limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The Constitution says any person, not.
Okay, so let's take that. Any person shall not be held to account for a capital or otherwise infamous crime without an indictment. None of these people are being held to account for a capital or infamous crime. They're not even holding Abrego to account for human trafficking or potential gang-related activity in America. He's not being incarcerated in America in a prison. He is being sent home to his home country. His status as a guest of the United States of America, in this case, not an unwanted guest, because he was never granted truly guest status. He was not given a visa, is being revoked. He is being sent home. He is not being brought to court in order to be incarcerated in an American prison. He is not being deprived of life, liberty, or property. He is being sent home. He can give whatever property he has in America away to anybody he wants. It's not being pounded. He is being sent. He can do whatever he wants with it. He's being sent home to his home country. That's it. All of these illegals are being sent home to their home country. They have absolutely no right to due process other than a habeas hearing that says, are you an American citizen? Nope. Bye-bye. Thanks for coming. Oh, do you have permanent residency status, which would afford you some other level of protection? No, I don't. Bye-bye. Thanks for coming. Get out. That's all that's required. Literally, they should hire a couple hundred immigration judges, which answer to the president, not to SCOTUS, because it's an administrative court, and they should process one of these every 5 minutes. Parade them in and out. They could do hundreds a day. 10,000s, between 100 of them, they could do 10,000 a day or more. That's frankly what they need to do.
Citizen, therein lies the debate and the root of my question. I mean, does any person just apply to citizens in your mind, or does it apply to citizens and non-citizens? The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, says it applies to citizens and non-citizens.
Well, let's be very clear. First and foremost, when the framers wrote our Constitution, they never envisioned that there would be an executive that would allow millions of people to come into the country illegally. They never fathomed that. Number two, more importantly, you have a situation right now. Is it okay for any administration to not follow the law, abuse border security laws, let millions of people in, and then hide behind the court system to say, well, now they're here, so now we have to go through a lengthy process? Let's examine this right now. Right now, what we know is that when people came into the country illegally, almost 90% of them would not even go to the hearings. So if you're supposed to show up for a hearing and you do not go, what are we supposed to do as a country?
Very
at that
quickly,
point?
let me just interject, and we're running out of time, and I still have to get to the economy.
Sure.
To your point about the hearings, does Congress need to work harder to get more funding, to get more resources to the courts so that you can better process people who are here, who are undocumented?
Right now, the courts need to step out of the way because everybody who's being deported has a lawful deportation order already attached to them. They have already seen their due process. For anybody else, like I said, go hire 200, 300, 400, 500 immigration judges. They work for the President of the United States. Have them do virtual hearings via Zoom, 5 minutes apiece. Are you an American citizen? No. Do you have permanent legal residency? No. Bye-bye. Boom. Deportation order as of right now. Get them out of the country. It's that. I think it should be that simple. Correct me if I'm wrong. If anybody in the comments thinks that I'm an idiot for that, please let me know. But that's where we need to go for this. And the fact that Donalds had to actually go on this show, more and more members of the Trump administration and their advocates and their surrogates have to go on these shows to try to explain to these shilling grifters exactly how the government works and what really is meant by due process. It's amazing. But please, like, comment, and subscribe as we are done for today. Thanks so much for rolling up. Really appreciate everybody being here. Like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share the Chris Highland Show with everybody that you know. Remember, God is good and He is sovereign. It'll all be good in the end. Till I catch you next time.